I'm going to suggest we get going, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Adam Blackwell. I'm the Vice President International at Development Services Group, and on behalf of the team at the Global Terrorism Trends and Analysis Center, better known as GTTAC, I will be moderating this session. For those of you who don't know us, GTTAC was created by Development Services Group and our partners at GMU's Terrorism, Transnational Crime and Corruption Center, led by Dr. Louise Shelley, to support DSG's contract with the Department of State to develop a database of global terrorism incidents, to prepare the annual annex of statistical information on terrorism, and to help prepare and edit the congressionally mandated country reports on terrorism. This is a continuation of a series of talks by eminent people in the field of terrorism. And we are delighted that we have one of the most eminent speakers in Jaideep Saikia, and his presentation will discuss insurgency and terrorism in Northeast India with active cross-border linkages with China, Myanmar, and Bangladesh. This will be followed by a 20-minute Q&A session open to audience participation. I would ask that you pose your questions in the Q&A function in Zoom as the talk is proceeding, so that we can start the questions and answers right after the talk is finished. So Jaideep Saikia is a terrorism and conflict analyst and a fellow Irregular Warfare Initiative at West Point, USA. He is also the author of several books on security and strategy, and has served the governments of India and Assam in security advisory capacities, including the National Security Council Secretariat of India, as an expert on Northeast India. He is a member of the Indian delegation for the Track 2 dialogue with Bangladesh, China, and Myanmar. His domain expertise includes insurgency in the Northeast, Islamist terrorism, Bangladesh, India-China boundary issues, counter-radicalisation, India's National Security Doctrine, and peace building with belligerent groups. Stephen Philip Cohen of the Brookings Institution, who inaugurated Saikia's best-selling book, Terror Sans Frontières, Islamic Militancy in Northeast India, termed the book as one of the most important books on the question of insurgency yet to appear. And Robert Hathaway, Director, Asia Program, Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, called Jaideep Saikia as one of India's best informed analysts on security challenges. So as I say, we'll start the presentation now. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom. We'll have about 20 minutes for what we hope will be an interesting dialogue. Thank you very much. Saikia, over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Blackwell. First of all, I must thank you for this wonderful opportunity to speak to the audience through your organization, GTTAC. So without further ado, I will give you the presentation now. I'm sharing the screen. And this is a dedicated presentation for Global Terrorism Trends and Analysis Center, Washington, D.C., folks. And I'm going to talk about insurgency and terrorism in Northeast India has been sort of introduced to you by Ambassador Blackwell. Well, I call my presentation Distant Frontier because, as I shall show you in the succeeding slide, we are in the Northeast quite distant from rest of India, particularly Delhi. So we are a frontier region where we are distant as well. Although the way forward would be to actually make us a proximate frontier, and that's a reason why a person like me, who's a student of security, would sort of delve into various aspects of security. And today, in the course of the next 20 minutes or so, I'll give you an overview of the insurgency and terrorism, the manner it started and way it is evolving in the present times. At the beginning and at the end, like Louis Carroll said in Alice in Wonderland, let's go to cartography, and that's the Northeast for you. And you can see the distance from Delhi. So when I term it the distant frontier, I'm not sort of mincing any words. That's Northeast India. And to give you a close-up bird's eye view, I have a map which shows the 8 states, primarily the 7 states, and the 8 state Sikkim, which was added to the Northeast, and that's why it was earlier called the 7 states. Of course, now Prime Minister Modi refers to it as Ashtalakshmi, or the 8 forms of the goddess of wealth, as we refer to goddess Lakshmi as. In his magnanimity, in his wisdom, he has referred to the 8 states of the Northeast as Ashtalakshmi, the 8 forms of the divine goddess of wealth and prosperity, Northeast. And perhaps he had the Act East policy in mind when he termed it so. But to talk about geography quickly before I come into the actual aspects of security, it's important for you to understand that we are perhaps the only expanse in the entire Southeast Asia region to be so strategically encircled that we have about 98% of our borders with countries such as China, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal placed a little further afield. And as I said, making us perhaps the only expanse in the whole region to be so strategically encircled. 98% of our borders are international, and we are connected to the mainland India only by a 2% tenuous corridor called the Siliguri or Chicken's Neck. I'm going to talk about that aspect as I proceed. To talk about insurgency is very important. That's strategic encirclement for you folks. And talk about insurgency, I must also allude to the fact that historically, I think, and in present time, things have got better with the dispensation in Delhi reaching out to the Northeast, but otherwise it was, in many sense of the word, the forgotten outpost. And as I said, because of the isolation and the unique arithmetic which sort of engenders this geography. But it must be remembered that even before it became a political entity with the rest of India, there were, even in history, and certainly in the medieval times, active linkages with the rest of India. That's important. And that is why Sanskritization, for the matter that the language which I speak in Assam, Assamese, is very close to Sanskrit, the mother language for most of the languages of at least northern India and northwestern of India, you see. So that's very important. So Sanskritization did happen, and the people who came from across the Patkai, from the Shan provinces in Burma, present-day Myanmar, assimilated and actually took on Hindu names and Sanskritized themselves. This happened until the British takeover of Assam in 1826 with the Treaty of Yandabu, which they concluded with the Burmese who had invaded Assam. Of course, the British enter India, or Assam, sorry, primarily for commercial interests, that is coal, oil, and tea. And even as they entered Assam, they ensured that the rest of the Northeast, which was part of Assam at that point of time, I'm referring to Nagaland, present Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh, and Meghalaya, they were, kept away, not from Meghalaya, Shillong was the capital, away from the administrative ambit of the British. That's important for you when you look at or try to understand the historical backdrop of the Northeast. Jump right into the security aspect, ladies and gentlemen. There are deep states and the strategic encirclement, which I showed you right in the beginning of by way of the map, has engendered the region to contain encirclement. That's why I use the common tool, encircle of Northeast. Deep state, of course, primarily allude to the inter-services intelligence of Pakistan, the Chinese agencies, which is perhaps the Ministry of State Security, and until 1971, when Pakistan was won, it was the inter-services intelligence of East Pakistan as well, who were trying to use the Northeast as to sort of, further the proxy war against India, using it as a launching detachment because of the various insurgencies which had sort of erupted since the inception of, with the coming of independence. Myanmar provided the basis and the most important corridor to the early insurgencies, which is the Naga insurgency, the Mizo insurgency, and the insurgency which erupted in Assam in the late 70s and the early 80s by way of the ULPA, which is the United Liberation Front of Assam, which is now a divided house with a pro-talk group inside Assam holding talks with the government of India, and the anti-talk or the independent faction of the Alpha staying away from a peace process. But the fact of the matter is, Myanmar did provide the corridor for the important insurgencies to make the way to Yunnan in China. So China and Pakistan, these two countries continue. And as we shall see, there is a renewed interest in the region. And these countries in duality have provided training, arms, and indoctrination. When I say indoctrination, it's primarily for the Islamist groups. I allude to the fact that there were a lot of Muslim fundamental organizations which had gone to the Pak-occupied Kashmir in places like Batrasi to train alongside Tanzims like Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, chaperoned by the inter-services intelligence of Pakistan. But they had gone with a different agenda altogether. They wanted to sort of, raise a lot of their brethren back in Assam. But I myself have talked to people who have come back and surrendered to the authorities. For instance, the Secretary General of the Harkatul Mujahideen, Abu Bakr Siddiqui, way back in 2001 when I spoke to him, when I was holding office in Assam as advisor, he said that, we went there hoping that we will sort of, raise a lot of the people back home, but we were told to do things which we have nothing to do about. So they disenchanted, they came back. So that gives you a very important idea as about the Hanafi school of Islam or the moderate school of Islam, which Assamese Muslims practice inside Assam. But as I shall show you in the succeeding slides, things have changed because of the alien agenda by way of Islamist terrorism, which is entering Assam in a very important way. The Indian state has tried to quell rebellion or bring back wayward groups into the mainstream by a combination of what they call Sam, Dam, Dandaved. Give me 30 seconds to explain that. You all have heard about Karl von Clausewitz's On War, the Prussian general, and you've heard of Sun Tzu, who wrote about the art of war, the 500 BC Chinese strategist, general scholar. So similarly, we had a very important strategist, scholar, and advisor to the then Emperor Chandragupta Maurya. So he wrote a treatise called the Artha Shastra, where he said the way you can quell a rebellion or an unrest is a combination of Sam, Dam, Dandaved. Sam simply means reconciliation or cajolement. Dam is simple bribery, and Dand means punitive action, and Ved is division. So the way the Indian state is trying to quell the rebellion and unrest and instances in this particular area or region is a combination of this. For instance, a very important group called the Mizo National Front came back because they were sort of, cajoled back into the Indian fold. And today, you have the former rebels actually holding court and swearing by the Indian Constitution and actually running the state alongside, the rest of the country. Peace dialogues have taken place and have been actually it's a work in progress because, as I said, the most important success story has been the Mizo National Front. Unfortunately, 25 years of ceasefire with the National Socialist Council of Nagaland, Isaac Chisisu and Muiva, and with a faction of the Alpha have yet to be resolved in its entirety. And there have been occasional bumps in the road which have to be crossed over in time to come. But fact of the matter is there has been cessation of hostilities with most groups at this point of time. But what's worrisome is the fact that Islamist terrorism of the new way, not the way I was talking about in 2000 when the Assamese Muslims went to Baprasi, came back disenchanted, but Islamist terrorism of the hue and color that is being seen worldwide by way of Al-Qaeda and Islamic State is sort of, having affiliates in and around India, and they have entered Assam as well and the Northeast. And they are slowly taking up the trenches, which we think insurgencies when they are coming over ground, the trenches are being taken over by the Islamist terror groups. The father of insurgency, I said. You see, it's very important to understand that these groups, primarily the Nagas, went to Yunnan way back in January 1967, and after that, over 4 gangs of Nagas were trained by the Chinese. And there has been a cessation of hostilities in 97, which makes it almost 25 years to this, on 1st of August, it complete 25 years, quarter of a century, protracted negotiation, but because of obstacles like they want a separate flag, a separate constitution, and most importantly, a greater Nagaland. I'm talking with the NSCNI here, folks. They want to integrate the Naga-dominated areas of Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, and Manipur, primarily Manipur. That's really the obstacle, you see. And that is why the dialogue has been stymied for primarily these 3 reasons. And of course, the non-resolution of the Naga issue is making other groups uneasy. And that's why I call it the traffic jam, because the Ulfa chief of staff, who is sitting in Yunnan in China, says that I don't want to get into talks. And one of the reasons he says he doesn't want to get into talks is because he feels that, if the mother of all insurgencies, that is the NSCN, have not been able to resolve its issues with the government of India, we certainly, a lesser group, will get to sort of caught up with this traffic jam, as it were. 55 years have passed since the first batch went to China in 1967. I'm talking the Naga group. And there was no near resolution. Folks, this is a very interesting photograph way back from 1968, a rare photograph. You can see them, and that's the Great Wall of China, naturally. When they reached Yunnan in 67, they were taken to then Peking, now Beijing, and the entire Naga group. And you can recognize he is the then youthful General Secretary, or now the leader of the NSCNIM. And this one is the former president. Of course, his name is still there. He's Isaac Chisisu, who is no more. And he is the main man, Mr. Muiva, Tuingaleng Muiva, who is running the NSCNIM at this point in time. And he is quite adamant about these 3 conditions which I spoke to you about in the last slide. Separate flag, separate constitution, and primarily the integration of Naga-dominated areas from Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, and Manipur. And I stress Manipur because he is a Naga from Ukhrul in Manipur. So like a Corsican who Napoleon was, he needs to do a little more to prove that he's a Naga, because today's territory of Nagaland doesn't allow him to sort of, and Manipur is outside of Nagaland's territory, but he wants that actually his homeland, which is in the hills of Manipur, to be included into the greater Nagaland. And those of you who have not visited Northeast, I think the Northeast people, particularly the tribal people, are very straightforward, honest, and very, very, hospitable. And it beats me as to why they took up arms against the Indian state in the first place. And I'm sure the international audience, which is watching this program, will certainly make an effort to visit the Enchanted Frontiers, which I think have come to be known. The Northeast has come to be known as. So let's quickly get on to Myanmar and China. Well, one of the reasons is that you see the camps of the insurgent groups are in Myanmar, and Arunachal Pradesh is here, and Assam is somewhere here. Now, they are naturally most interested in sort of, collection of money, extortion, abduction for extortion. So the way they enter India is through these groups, which are quite porous, to say the least. And there, despite the fact that there is a good border management posture by the Assam Rifles, a very important Indian paramilitary force. The fact of the matter is they have been able to sort of sneak in and conduct violence and subterfuge inside the Northeast. So that's route from Myanmar for you. Staying with Myanmar, as I said, that's the most important cradle and conduit to China. And despite the fact that we have, in the past, New Delhi have tried to sort of, exert its influence over Yangon and then Naypyidaw to try and act against the insurgent groups, the response has been quite detached. And that's because the lower echelons of the Myanmar's army are normally and almost invariably provided EW or early warning by the lower echelons of the Myanmar's army. So when they go and attack a particular camp, say A, they find the camp is the camp has been sort of is abandoned. So so there is naturally money talk here. So we have to bear that in mind. But there have been a silver lining by way of joint operations between the Indian Army and the Myanmar's army, starting way back with Operation Golden Bird in 1995, and very recently in 2019 we had Operation Sunrise 1 and 2, which destroyed camps in Taka, and I'll show you where Taka is, which really was a very, very positive move from the side of Myanmar's army before the military takeover. That's Taka, which is west of the Chinwin River. I'm showing the Alpha flag because the Alpha camps were also in this region next to the NSC and Kaplan general headquarters. And after they were attacked, these groups have actually moved deeper into Myanmar and really closer to the China-Myanmar border and willingly into the hands of the Chinese, as it were. You see, the 1st February 2021 putsch last year was a game changer by way of the security matrix for this region and for rest of India as well, because naturally the Chinese, after the massive humiliation they faced in eastern Ladakh and Galwan, are now sort of adopting a different sort of methodology by which they are trying to sort of bleed India with 1,000 cuts, phrase which is borrowed from their all-weather ally Pakistan, and they're trying to sort of naturally prop up these Indian insurgent groups which had temporarily stopped with Tang Xiaoping, not trying to sort of send revolutions across the border, but I think it started now, as I just showed. And of course, the military takeover in Myanmar has emboldened the Indian insurgent groups, so much so that they have actually come into an agreement with the MA, with the Myanmar's group, primarily the valley-based insurgent groups. Valley-based, when I say valley-based, I am primarily talking about Valley of Manipur, which actually perpetrated, as I showed, some of the very interesting terror attacks in recent times. What is a quid pro quo with the MA and the IIGs? It is basically they said, we will not touch your camps the way we did it earlier. And I showed you how they demolished the camps in Dhaka in the course of Sunrise 1 and 2. But they're utilizing the VVIPs or the Indian insurgent groups to quell the unrest, which has erupted in a very big way by way of the People's Defense Forces inside Myanmar, which is naturally a militia which has been founded by the National Unity Government of Myanmar, which is in exile somewhere in Thailand. My guess is they were somewhere between Chiang Mai and Bangkok, but the fact of the matter is, I think the recent reports say that they are gaining ground because they have got into an agreement with the militias, ethnic militias, and they have been able to attack very important Myanmar's army positions, as well as positions of the Indian insurgent groups who are helping the Myanmar's army. But there have been renewed attacks on the Indian security forces inside the northeast as a result of the aid which the Chinese are giving them, and because Myanmar has once again sort of placed itself as a very important launching detachment from where they can carry out attacks across the border, which is somewhat porous. They can come without let and hindrance and go back and go back and sort of speed away into the night, really. So let's talk about the line from Shakespeare, murder most foul. On the 4th of June 2015, there was an attack on the Indian regiment of 6 Dogras in Chandel in Manipur, and the NS in Kaplang led the ambush along with 3 other groups and killed quite a few soldiers of the Indian army. And it should have been November 2021, 46 Assam Rifles was attacked in Churachandpur. I'm sorry, I got that year wrong. It was 13 November 2021, which was again sort of perpetrated by the PLA Manipur and the Manipur Naga People's Front, again Valley-based insurgent groups who got into an agreement with the Tatmadaw. And this time around, unconfirmed, but my research tells me that earlier there used to be simply safe havens and arms aid, etc. But now I feel that the Ministry of State Security of the PRC of China are actually planning the attacks on the Indian security forces. In other words, we have observers and planners alongside the Indian insurgent groups. Most leaders of which are now billeted in the province in Yunnan because of the demolition of the camps. They have moved into the Yunnan province, and actually a proxy war, irregular war, as it were, is in progress at this point of time. And there's a difference in the way that they are waging war with the Indian state at this point of time, because earlier non-combatants were not targeted. But this time around, we see suddenly, earlier when non-combatants were targeted, they had apologized, etc. But this time around, we see, and we saw that in the case of the latest big attack on 13th of November 2001, that innocent civilians were also attacked. And the commanding officer of 46 Assam Rifles, his wife, and his 5-year-old child were killed in a dastardly manner by these insurgent groups. And as I said, and I was underscore the fact that they were planned, trained, and chaperoned by the Chinese agency, Ministry of State Security. Now, who is the main guy? Who is the Chinese? Who is the Chinese guy among the insurgent groups? Now, here, ladies and gentlemen, is the person Manohar Mayum of the PLA Manipur. Now, here in this rare photograph, he is shown talking to old man Kaplang, who was the vice president of Undivided Naga Socialist Council Nagalim. He's no more, but we see Manohar Mayam actually sort of trying to sort of this photograph doesn't explain the plot, but it's showing that he is naturally explaining some attack methodology to the guy who was the titular head of the NSC in Kaplan. Is no more now. So that's Manohar Mayum and SS Kaplan, a legendary figure when you talk about insurgency Northeast. So China has entered the Northeast insurgency game in a different way through proxy, as I said, and this is the logo of the Ministry of State Security of the PRC. And I was telling you where the Indian insurgents are billeted. In Ruli, a place in Yunnan, Dinsun County, Prefecture 20, I think our agencies are quite able, and they have been able to pinpoint exact location of the places where most of these insurgent leaders, including the one whose photograph I just showed you, resides, and from there where they plan action against the Indian security forces. Prefecture 20 in Yunnan. So the dragon shadow is not just by way of planning attacks, but they are trying to use these Northeast insurgent groups and in order to help the Maoists as well, the Alpha Independent and the PLO of Manipur being the most important groups. And the recent arrest on the 6th of March this year of a person called Urup Kumar Bhattacharjee. He is a CPI Maoist, a hardcore left-wing extremist. This is a very, very big success of the Assam police or the Assam intelligence branch, which we call here the special branch. And his arrest will unearth the entire left-wing extremist picture and connection, because I believe that they wanted to construct a red corridor through Myanmar from India, central India, where the left-wing extremism is proliferating in a big way, as most of you know, through the northeast into Myanmar and then to China. So that is the red corridor, because the closure of the one which existed earlier to Nepal has shut down. And of course, China wants to keep India and Myanmar in a response mode. Shepherding of the insurgent groups is one of the reasons. And Myanmar is very important to India because of economic and security. Our activist policy, our Indian insurgent groups actually are in that area, and we need to sort of have better relationship with Myanmar. But for some reason, China, for its own interests, are trying to sort of put a spanner in the works. And as I said, Chinese observers are planning attacks on the Indian army through the Indian insurgent groups. And they are utilizing overground workers, intellectuals, even inane students of security like myself. They have not been able to cultivate me, but the fact of the matter is they're following my writings, etc. And about 5 years ago, I stumbled upon something which I was at that time a senior fellow in Delhi, a very important think tank, which the director is the present National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval. And then I, of course, suddenly saw that they had translated my works into Chinese. Of course, I was very quick and I was able to download this particular picture, but they took it off the web. But the fact of the matter is, you can see the way that systematically trying to reach out, cultivate, and also follow the even the academia of India. So between the lines, beyond boundaries. So arms from China is a very important thing, and I'll spend a slide here, ladies and gentlemen. It originates naturally in Yunnan, comes all the way through the Irrawaddy River to Port Saitwe, and from Saitwe it goes to Chittagong by barges. Chittagong is Bangladesh, then overland to Sherpur, which is in the northwestern corner of Bangladesh, and then crosses over to Meghalaya in West Garo Hills, and then to Assam in Gwalpara. And the explosives which have gone off every so often in Assam in the good old days, and we can see that now happening with the entry of the Islamist actually takes this particular road. So that's arms in the road for you. Now quickly on to Islamist terror. The illegal migration is a long sort of history or story. It's happening for Bangladesh. It's economic migrants primarily, but it is altering the demography of Northeast and giving rise to new social formations because there are a lot of intermarriages. I mean, I hark to the movie Braveheart by Mel Gibson, the King of England, when he's not able to conquer Scotland, he calls the generals together and says, among other things, he says, if you cannot win them out, breed them out. So that's exactly what's happening in Northeast, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, you see, there is a lot of intermarriages between the illegal migrant population and the indigenous people of Northeast, giving rise to social formations in the region. It doesn't augur very well because the illegal migrants from Bangladesh continue to be informed by experiences from across the border and even perhaps the global Salafi movement or the transformative movement Islam is passing through at this point of time, which includes the emergence of the Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. So, Inter-Services Intelligence of Pakistan, they've had a long history of trying to fuel 1,000 prairie fires in Assam. So since I can remember, and I have been able to document that in my book. And 2014, the Jamaatul Mujahideen Bangladesh Assam Bureau was created and was unhurted, and alert Assam police and alert special branch was able to make 56 arrests. And very recently, and hats off to the Assam police and the special branch particularly, they were able to arrest, Al-Qaeda affiliated group called the Ansarullah Bangla team. But it all began with the Ayman al-Zawahiri making the formation of the Al-Qaeda in the subcontinent on the 30th of September 2014. And the Islamic State has metastatized after Operation Inherent Resolve, or the territorial ouster of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria from these two countries. And they have metastatized in a cancerous way, and they have formed affiliates all over. One in India is called Wal-e-Hind, which was formed in 2019. And as I said, there have been a very important apprehension of 5 Al-Qaeda cadres affiliated to the Ansarullah Bangla team on the 5th of March this year, just a couple of days ago, which actually tells me, and I've been following this particularly in my theory, that there is a third wave of radicalization. I'm not going to spend time explaining this at this point of time, ladies and gentlemen, because of positive time. If Q&A permits, I will talk about that. That's me, that's Stephen Philip Cohen, which Adam Blackwell talked about, inaugurating my best-selling book, Terrorism and Conflict. Very modest of me to have spoken about that, right? Well, anyway, this was way back in 2004. The ISI, or the Inter-Services Intelligence mark, is very palpable in the Northeast. They have about 16 groups, or the MFOs, and I was able to sort of document that way back in 2002, and the Ministry of Home Affairs prepared a similar list in 2012, which had just to list MFOs less. But most important line quoting from my own book is that they are silent not by absence of activity, but presence of inactivity. In other words, they are not engaging the security forces because that will attract attention. Their objective is Lebensraum, or living space, and they want to occupy it by electoral methods, by radicalizing the people, and by actually not getting into a face-to-face frontal battle with the security forces in the manner that ethnic insurgents have been doing. So they are doing it in a very calibrated way. Sleeper cells be established with regular visits by Pakistani IS commanders, and during interrogation they have said that they have just been instructed to enter Assam, take shelter, and await a position of strength. For what remains to be the question, and the apprehension of the 5 Al-Qaeda affiliated cadres would probably in days to come tell us the larger story. So, bleed with India with 1,000 cuts is the is the primer which Pakistan and now their all-weather mentor China is all out to sort of sort of perpetrate on India. And the Islamic agenda, because of the ouster of the Islamic State from Syria and Iraq, and the atmospherics in Bangladesh, we see two pincers coming, one from the west and one from the east, which will have a very interesting agenda for South and Southeast Asia, primarily first Western targets in these areas. And when I talk about the pincers, I'm talking about the chicken's neck, which I referred to right in the beginning. You see, there's a very tenuous 22-kilometer corridor which connects the northeast to the rest of India. The pincers are going to work in such a way that it's going to come from the east, that is from Bangladesh and lower Assam, because they have already entered Assam, and one from Afghanistan or the AFPAC region. And then you would have the severance of this Siliguri corridor, and northeast would be up for takes, really. And that would really bring it to the fore the greatest nightmare that Indian security policymakers would sort of be faced with. Towards the last of my presentation, I will just tell you one aspect. Who is really actually puppeteering these Islamists, at least in this region. We talk about Ayman al-Zawahiri naturally. We talked about Rahman Nizami of Bangladesh. He's been hanged gratefully, or he was a member of the Jamaat-e-Islami. Safdar Nogori of the Simi, of Professor Hafiz Said of Lashkar-e-Toiba, Qureshi, who has been killed by the United States Delta Forces, but his success has not been named as far as I know. But you see, ISIS is still up about, and Bashir in Indonesia has been released. His counterpart Hambali continues to sort of rot in Gitmo in Guantanamo Bay, but fact of the matter is he is moving about and he's been released in Indonesia. And of course, Akhundzada of the Taliban, the supreme leader, and Jaish Mohammed's Hafiz Said, and who you guess is the Professor Moriarty of the entire episode, is actually the ISI or the Inter-Services Intelligence Chief, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid. He's the man who controls all these people, at least in this particular region. So that's a circle of concern for you. And the Zawahiri gauge is, of course, into this entire area which encompasses part of the northeast, part of the Rohingya belt, and Bangladesh. So Islamists, as I said, are waiting for the demise of the ethnic militants to take out the trenches after the demise of these groups like Alpha, the NDFB, and even the NSCN. And their objective is Nizam and Mustafa, which, ladies and gentlemen, I must underscore, is going to be a never-ending one. You're not going to have them coming over ground like the ethnic militancy, you see. So in that sense, I think clash of civilization and Samuel Huntington's theory is turning out to be correct. If some of you think that I make my presentation sitting at home in an AC room, think again. I do visit, in hospital areas, despite the fact that I have got a very bad fall during a battle exercise. I go to the Indo-Bangladesh border with the Indian Army and get to, I'm wearing my Illinois t-shirt there. But the fact of the matter, I do move around and try and come back and tell you the real story. So summing up, ladies and gentlemen, we need a comprehensive MAGA policy so that, the peace process can be actually taken up front. The re-entry of China into the Northeast insurgency game has to be factored in very, very closely, and there has to be correct diplomacy within Myanmar. At this point, I think it needs recalibration, whether you will support the military or the democratic movement. Well, realpolitik tells you that you need to do, well, that's, I think, been the Indian stance, and that's why they sort of abstained in the United Nations. But the fact of the matter is you have to take one side or the other at some point of time. And if there are Q&A on this, I can answer. And I think the Islamists propaganda at this point in time is at the highest, and I think merits caution. You recall what the Taliban said to the United States coalition-led, US-led coalition inside Afghanistan. They said, and quite it is come out to be true, you have the watches, we have the time, and that's precisely what's going to happen. What happened in Afghanistan, and I think that holds true for the rest of the world as well. And I think it's a matter of time before the third wave of radicalization is activated, which is still on, it's a work in progress after the first and the second wave have happened. And I think the only way out at this point of time, of course, there are various ways, is to create a very important regional security architecture. And I think the Quads, which is led by the United States and has important members like Japan and Australia and India, has to actually have a, it is maritime in its objectives really, but I think it needs to sort of recalibrate itself to get out from the just the extra maritime scenario and get into extra maritime aspects as well. And that's the way it's going to sort of play for the next decade or so, I hope. So that's it for you folks. I'm sorry I just overshot my time at 2 minutes, but thank you. And I'm going to sort of close now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very, very interesting question. I'd just like to remind everybody, please don't put your questions in the chat. Put them in the Q&A. So I do have a couple in the chat, which I will read the first one. Jaideep, is PRC support to insurgent groups in Northeast India and Myanmar based only on ideology? Or does China have other motives for supporting insurgencies in India and South and Southeast Asia?
Well, as I said, you see, naturally, when the Nagas first went to Yunnan and to China, they were, it was expected that they would follow the communist model. But Fizo, whose photograph I showed you right at the beginning, he came back along with his compatriots, and he said that communism is a no-no. They came back for Christ and Nagaland because, and he made a long statement as to why. He said, well, we have no problem with communist Russia at that point of time in China, but we don't want to adopt the ideology of China. But notwithstanding that, China has continued, and as we saw even in recent times, even as I speak, they are helping them with various other things. So ideology is not perhaps uppermost in the mind, really, except the fact that I think one or two of the leaders, including Manohar Mayom, the person who I showed in the photograph, is an out-and-out a Maoist or a left-wing extremist, and that is why he is probably the person to look out for, because he is trying to sort of help the construction of the Red Corridor all the way to China.
The second question, again, repeat, please put your questions in the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes left, so it would be helpful. Has unrest in Myanmar by the Tatmadaw hindered or helped China's covert support to insurgencies in Asia?
Certainly it has, because as I said, the Indian insurgent groups have got into an agreement with the Tatmadaw, with the junta, and as a result, we can do little about that. There have been surgical strikes in the past and semi-successful, but the fact of the matter is when Aung San Suu Kyi came to power and became the state councillor, she made a visit to India where she cautioned India against venturing into Myanmar for carrying out such surgical strikes. So naturally, China is using Myanmar as a veritable launch pad for, not only launching attacks against Indian security forces, but training them and most importantly, driving a wedge between India and Myanmar, as I said, because that will be a very important point if tomorrow New Delhi were to sort of look for good ties with Naypyidaw.
The next question, there are media reports that a few groups in Northeast India are reluctant to enter an accord with the government of India, including the NSCN, given their doubt and huge illegal income. Your views?
I think it's a very, very important and a very pertinent question. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the viewer is referring to NSC and IM. Yes, you did mention that. You see, 25 years of peace or cessation of hostilities have the peace dividend certainly has paid off. So we have the second rung of leadership of the NSC and IM who've never actually seen the jungle, but now 25 years old. They are not only extorting, collecting illegal taxes, etc., having a lavish life, which has ensured that they will not go back to Oking or the mobile headquarters of the jungles. But at the same time, I think they are running a parallel government inside Nagaland, so much so that the former governor and interlocutor of Nagaland, Mr. R.N. Ravi, actually called them armed gangs who are running, a government by turning a blind eye to the elected representative government. And I think it actually incurred the ire of the NSA-9, and he had to be removed from both his governorship and interlocutorship, and we have a new interlocutor now. But it's a very important question. I think NSA-9, despite the fact that they are in peace talks, are doing everything else which they should not be doing, including extortion, gun running, collecting taxes, marching from camp A to B, collecting arms in the camps and designated camps, and of course elbowing into other states and arming other groups of the region. And if I may add quickly, Ambassador, I think naysayers within the NSCN-IM, or not NSCN-IM really, but Naga groups have been assassinated. And the most glaring case was a Zeliangrong leader in the Tamenglong district of Manipur who was gunned down. I am referring to a person, if my memory doesn't fail me, is Abon Mai. He was gunned down because he spoke out against, the NSCNI's agenda of a Greater Nagaland. He was abducted and he was gunned down. This happened last year, September sometimes. So, NSCNI, I think Government of India needs to sort of point out these aspects when they hold talks, when they carry on with the talks with the Naga group.
Okay, the next question is, what is the degree of cooperation between India and Bangladesh on security, given that both countries rank bilateral ties as a high priority?
I think at this point of time, we have a friend and an ally in Bangladesh, particularly the Prime Minister herself, Sheikh Hasina, and there has been military exercises by way of Operation Sampriti, when the armies, special forces of both these countries hold regular military exercises. But you must understand, and quickly, Bangladesh actually, to my mind, is two Bangladeshes. One which is devoted to the spirit of 1971, which led to the liberation, and actually they're devoted to Bengali nationalism, and they are pro-India in that sense. But the other Bangladesh, which fled Bangladesh after this liberation, is identifies itself with the global Salafi movement, and naturally groups like the Ansarullah Bangla team, cadres of which have been arrested in India, Assam very recently, owe the allegiance to the ISIS, and Neo-JMB, or the Neo-Jamaat Mujahideen in Bangladesh, owe the allegiance to the Al-Qaeda. And there have been, especially in 2016, 17, 18, and 19, suicide attacks, hostage takings, exercises, etc. And I fear now, with the coming closer to the South Asian region of both these groups, chaperoned by the Taliban, which is relying on the Doha Agreement with the United States, we will see perhaps more radicalized Bangladesh. But the fact of the matter is, India and Bangladesh are friends and allies, and Sheikh Hasina is doing every bit to control this Islamist alien agenda, which is trying to get a foothold in her land.
Excellent. We have a couple of time for a couple of more questions and a pivot from your last point. This question here: there is news that Al Qaeda's interest in establishing itself in Assam. Why do you think that is happening?
Well, Al Qaeda has always had the a plan which unfolded itself in 2014 when Ayman Zawahiri, through a worldwide televised statement, named Assam as part of the Al Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, along with Kashmir, Bangladesh, and Burma. I mean, these are the 4 or 5 names. I really have seen the actual televised statement, and the fact that he named Assam at that point of time, I think half the battle was won. I must say here, Ambassador, that Assamese Muslims are a very moderate lot, and perhaps they are more Indians than I am. But the fact of the matter is, there is a section which is amenable because of the ill devices of social media, etc., and perhaps even other aspects which lead them into the hands of the radicals or people or groups like Al Qaeda who are out to sort of radicalize these the minority. So the only prescription I really have is to psychologically segregate the minority population from the ill effects of these radicals, which are alien to Assam and India. A, B, I think we must empower the minorities and actually use them against the alien agenda in our battle against the alien agenda. And C, I think we must follow the money trail and sort of savor it. And D, I think if all fails, and even otherwise, I think we should sort of adopt that methodology. We should use kinetic method and utilize the second rung of leadership, which is a very important conduit between the leadership sitting in Tora Bora, Kabul, or wherever, in Peshawar, Quetta, and the target area, target group, which is the innocent Muslim population of India and Assam. So if the second rung of leadership is sort of neutralized by whatever means, kinetic or otherwise, then you will have a breathing space for the counter-radicalization process, which I think Assam police and the intelligence branch here, way back in 2014, they did particularly well under the leadership of one person called Pallab Bhattacharya, who was then Director General and Head of Intelligence. Assam.
Okay, we have one more question. What I will do for those of you who are not able to ask your questions, I will forward them to our speaker and hopefully be able to get you a written response after the fact. But I think the next one is, there's a couple and it's interrelated, is the nexus between illicit drug trafficking and illicit drugs in the Golden Triangle and insurgency. Is it growing, or how do you see it evolving?
Well, it was growing, but I think of late there has been a lot of successes in the sort of savoring this conduit, because after all, a lot of drug cultivation takes place in Myanmar, and these are naturally conduited to rest of the world, if I may say, through the northeast. And Guwahati, from where I work and reside, happen to be one of the waypoints. And I think, once again, hats off to the authorities for having sort of, very ably countered this particular menace. But yes, drugs, insurgency, arms running, and as I told you, you see the killing of the commanding officer of 46 Assam Rifles was a drug-related affair, because he was trying to stop the drugs, investment in his area. And I think most of the insurgent groups, now having jettisoned their founding principles of sovereign Manipur or sovereign, whatever this, that, the other, are now sort of graduating into mafiosi style, sort of, killing for ransom, or things like that, and that was a glaring example what happened on the 13th of November 2021.
Jaideep, I'm going to use a little bit of the moderator's privilege here and ask you one last question. Of the groups that are active in Northeast India, would you consider them insurgency groups or terrorist organizations?
Well, certainly the ethnic insurgent groups are all insurgent groups, but there is a very thin line between terror action and insurgency. Insurgency starts off with an ideology for wanting to sort of, raise the standards of the people, and sovereignty is something which came because, let me give you an example of the United Liberation Front of Assam. It was a militant manifestation of the Assam agitation against illegal migration from Bangladesh. I think perfectly valid. But the fact of the matter is, at some point of time, it graduated into other forms, including taking shelter in Bangladesh was something which didn't go down very well with the people of Assam, and naturally, that's why it have been sidelined. But at this point of time, I would still consider them insurgents, except this last case of killing of non-combatants. That looks like to me a very important terrorist act, and that is precisely why I also hark back to the fact that India doesn't have an anti-terror doctrine policy, which I have been working on for some time. They do make a difference between insurgents and terrorists, and while they have spoken to insurgent groups like the Mizo National Front and have brought them over ground, and they're actually holding office in Mizoram, but they are certainly not talking to groups like the Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Toiba, which are, absolutely terrorist groups. Because, as I said, the quest for Nizam-e-Mustafa and the Islamist agenda is never going to be an ending one. It's a never-ending one. It will go on till the end of time.
Well, with that, my friends, we will end this edition of our speaker series, and I would like to, on behalf of the entire group, thank Jaideep Saikia for his in-depth presentation and willingness to answer some tough questions. This edition will be recorded and will be on our website for those of you who want to refer to it in the future. Again, Jaideep, thank you very much. I know it's late in the evening in India. I'd also like to thank all of our participants for logging on, whether it be early in the morning or later in the evening. We appreciate your attention and good questions. So without further ado, thank you very much, everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you all the participants.